All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and we've got an amazing episode for you today. It is Q&A day, and we ponder this question: what if your investment property barely moved after 6 years, but your gut told you to hang on to the property? Or what if your investment property was unexpectedly demolished? Would you rebuild the same, or would you turn that setback into a high return opportunity? These are good questions, Ben. What else do we cover?
Well, Bryce, what if your portfolio was returning 10%, but it was a bit unconventional? And finally, in what's making property news, I'm at it again. The exodus in Victoria continues. I'll tell you all about the latest data in the property rental exodus in Vic.
Ben, they're exiting the state. That is a surprise. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and welcome back to you too, mate. Winners or grinners, are you, Ben? Winners or grinners?
Well, I think we're both winners at the moment, mate. It was a good result of footy on the weekend. We're sitting okay on top there and had a good little win against the Crows. But your win, let's talk about these incredible people who are killing my tipping. They are absolutely killing my tipping. Freo.
Oh, boo-hoo, mate. Well, if that's all you have to worry about is they're killing your tipping, mate, try following them. Hey, try following them. It's like when the Queenslanders complain about they need to put a jumper on some days in winter. It's like, oh, boo-hoo, we live in Melbourne. It's freezing here. So, yeah, no, we're both winners. I was watching the Cats game, Ben, and saw at the top right that Freo were winning and comfortably at the beginning. So I thought, we must be playing at home. So nice to see that they were playing away. But I'm happy to move on, but you probably want to linger on the Pies, do you?
No. We're just banking the 4 points. Move on next week.
Sitting pretty up near the pointy end of the ladder, up north of the ladder, which is good. Hey, couple things.
Yes.
I want you to talk about the RBA announcement shortly, but before we do, I'll just quickly. I know I've said this a lot, and some of our regular listeners will be going, holy smokes, can you just go and have this trip because you keep talking about it? But it's the last week.
We're off on the weekend.
We are off on the weekend. So thepropertycouch.com.au/donation if you want to make a contribution to what we are doing over in Indonesia in a couple of days' time. I would love to hear from you. We're running out of time, Ben. We're running out of time, so we'd love to get you involved. But, mate, let's talk about the news of the week. The RBA met 2 days ago, Ben, and I don't think there was too many surprises with the outcome.
Yes, mate, we had the RBA. It was pretty predictable. We got the 25 basis points. So cash rate's now at 3.85. We're having a little bit of a side bet whether it might be a 35 basis points cut, which would then bring it down into quarterly increments. But we didn't get that. And so, how would we describe it? There's still going to be data-led. It's not a lay-down misere in terms of the number of cuts we're going to get, depending on how sticky inflation is. But, Evan's believing that we'll probably get minimum of 1, possibly 2. I'm probably in the 2 camp, a little bit more confident on the 2 camp, maybe even a 3rd, depending on how the economy bounces. But remembering, the restriction now really is about just how much employment we have got. And then basically, what happens with inflation. If inflation comes down further because the economy more broadly around business confidence and sentiment's a little bit patchy, to say the least. But we do expect the consumer confidence and sentiment will tick up off the back of this. And of course, Australia is reasonably well protected in terms of what's going on from a tariff point of view, but there's still that global uncertainty that we just don't know about, right? So, we're going into some headwinds, which is allowing the RBA to keep their powder dry to when they need it.
And some welcome relief to some very stretched households across the country, Ben.
Yeah.
So any rate reduction is always welcome. So, which is good news. So, my Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, is I've come across a reel, and it very much speaks to the mantra of what you and I talk about in terms of you sign off each week around this particular concept. But we'll cut to the reel and then we'll have a little chat about it afterwards.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received and why?
Contemplate the price you pay for inaction. So I think a lot of the time we presume that inaction has no cost, that it's like an impartial strategy and it can cause us to continue to manana decisions. But it does. Inaction does have a cost because your attention is the most important thing that you have. And it's not time. People think that time is the most important resource you have in life. It's not. It's attention. Because you can spend your time in ways where your attention is captured such that you didn't enjoy the time or realize the time has passed. So contemplate the price that you pay for inaction. It's a justification for you doing things sooner rather than later and committing.
There you go, Ben. Contemplate the price you pay for inaction. It's a justification for you doing things sooner than later and committing. I don't know how many times we've tried to say in very different ways that the inaction will cost you a lot of money. So I am constantly on the lookout for different ways that we can get other people to try and speak to our community to say that procrastination is one of the biggest expenses that you'll ever face in your life. And so Chris Williamson has a big audience nationally, and that crossed my desk. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever received and why? That was it.
Yeah, I like the forking there that they've done in terms of the attention one, because I can say to my boys who might be doom scrolling, it's wasting a bit of time there, boys. What have you learnt? What have what have you captured out of that time that you spent doom scrolling? So I do like that little idea of inaction. Oh, I'm doing something. Well, yeah, but you're not really doing anything. So, now I don't mind some downtime where the brain is, less active. That's healthy actually. But I like that little idea of it's not time, it's attention. I think
attention.
There's a message in there.
Really good one. Spend your time being attentive to. So there you go, folks. Marinate on that as you go through your week. All right, Ben, let's rip into today's show. It's one of our favourite parts of the month when we do Q&A day. We've got 4 questions that we're going to handle today. The first one comes from Sam, and it's a question regarding selling or holding an underperforming investment property in Penrith. Let's listen to that question now.
Hey guys, just found you guys a few weeks ago on Spotify. The information that I'm getting is phenomenal, so keep up the great work. Really appreciate it, along with everybody else. Just have a bit of a situation that I'm in. My wife and I purchased our first home, being a townhouse, 15 months ago now in Penrith, and we're planning to stay here long term. However, my brother, mum, dad and myself purchased an investment property in 2018 in Penrith. The error we made was that we purchased a unit, and over the last 6 years hasn't performed all that great, only going up about $100,000 if we're lucky. It's negatively geared, so we're always pulling money out of our pocket each week, and I'd like to get another investment property. However, I'm not sure whether we should just sell this one, start fresh, maybe get a couple, or whether we hold on to it, hold a bit of faith that it will go up a little bit more, and withdraw some equity from it, because we do have a little bit still, and purchase with that equity rather than selling. Just main question here is whether we should sell or hold the property, being that it hasn't been performing the best over the last 6 years. I think the main thing going for us, or I'm trying to convince myself, is this new airport that's being built out here in Western Sydney, hoping that it will go up in value. But holding out a lot of hope for that, I think. So keen to hear what you guys think, and have a good one.
Hey Ben, the whole holding out for hope strategy, mate, that's been around for a while.
Well, and the counterbalance to that is that time sort of, heals all wounds type story here. So hence why this is a very, very common question, and that's why we wanted to go here today in this particular example. Now, of course, we don't know the financial situation of Sam, so we're going to just basically, there's a few things that we want them to think about, and this for our community, if you're in a similar situation. The first one for me that was on the radar was my brother, mum, dad, and I purchased an investment property back in 2018. We need to make sure that there's really clear alignment in terms of what are your short, medium, and long-term goals as a family. Because especially if the brother isn't sort of partnered up yet or whatever, their plans are, if the idea was a goal to sort of get your brother into the market, well, as you can see there, it hasn't really materialized in terms of getting that capital growth as part of that story. Now, we also don't know who's on title and who's not on title. There might be some financial support that's happening behind that. So all of those are the first things from a consideration point of view. So if our community and anyone's sort of thinking about going into partnership type investing, it must be really clear about what you're trying to achieve in the medium to longer term. Because if you get misalignment or disalignment at some point in the future, one wants to sell, one wants to hold, that creates all types of mess. So that's the first thing that, we want to basically get a clear understanding of. In terms of units in general, and we've spoken about this before, and even if there's an airport coming, and there's demand, more units are going to be built. So tell me what's unique about this unit. Tell me about its aspect and that it can't be built out and it can't be replicated and why it can't be replicated. Because the reality is, unless you've got something unique about it, then remember, we always say that supply is the enemy of capital growth, and there could be risk of more supply coming in if the demand is there. So that could limit the future potential of growth. Airport, yes, it does create not only movement of business people and free independent travellers, and freight also comes into play there. But the reality is that that's not hundreds of thousands of workers, but it does create an ecosystem. And so that is true that there will be some economic value that is going to be in that whole area of the new airport coming into play. But is that enough for me to sort of say, I'm going to hope that that's going to be all right? I would probably say no. And I would probably say, again, unless that apartment has some type of scarcity associated with it, it would be something more of, and again, I can't make a full definitive comment here, but it's something on that I would make some further investigations around that, coupled with their financial information and the goals that they're trying to achieve. And potentially that would then inform the ultimate decision that I would make.
Yeah, well said. I'm gonna double click on what you said too, Ben, in terms of the numbers will answer the question, and we think we know what the numbers will say based on our experience. But I think this, Sam, you need to go through that exercise. What a recycle costs look like? What does it look like for you to keep the property and put in a capital growth rate that you think is reasonable? And I guess you've got some history to give you an idea on what that looks like on an annual compounding basis. And then you work out what your recycle costs to get out and to get into another property are, and then you project it over a period of time. Given that houses have performed better than units, and there's a supply of units in that area, I tend to agree with what Ben says. At face value, based on what we know, I'd probably be leaning towards moving it on, largely because there's so many people involved, Ben. So if you've got four people you've got to share a lean profit with, and you're going to burn a decade, and then share it four ways on a lean profit, that's a decade you can't get back. So
well said.
That's what I'd be thinking. The other thing is, you go through phase. I've gone through phases as an advisor, and I feel like I'm in that contribution mature stage as an advisor, Ben. But there was a time when I was an enthusiastic amateur, and I'm not too proud to say that. And I used to encourage investors to buy back in my enthusiastic amateur stage based on future infrastructure that was coming. There's a future shopping centre coming here, and there's a future train station coming here. And what I've since learned from that experience is I want to invest with certainty. I want to know what's actually there now. And if that stuff comes in the future, I'm going to keep an eye on it, but I'm actually not going to buy into a hope strategy. And of course, I'm talking to the point here where Sam has said, I'm trying to convince myself to hold because of the new airport being built in Western Sydney. Now, that is future infrastructure, and it's obviously on its way. But it's still part of a unknown that I don't want to play. I want to invest with certainty. I want to absolutely invest with certainty. I want precedent. I want historical precedent to help me with that certainty. Because we've said it a lot on this podcast that past performance is a pretty good indicator of future performance. Unlike every prospectus you ever read in the share market, property, we just wrote about this in the book. Property is pretty stable performance. Not a lot changes, right? So therefore, that's one of the games that we can play as a property investor. We can actually get certainty because we can actually see what's happened in the past, and we can actually use that to give us the very best indication of the future. So, and then just the other note I put here, Ben, is joint and several liability of loans on this property with when you're investing with other people. And I think you nailed it at the top, Ben, where you said when you make the decision to buy, you're probably all in that moment on a similar life agenda path, but it doesn't take long for those life agendas to fragment when meet a partner or go down the path, or I want to do this, or it's just super quick for family units to not fragment as a family unit, Ben, just fragment on goals and agenda and in the direction that they're going for some of these major financial decisions.
Yeah, and I think just, a couple of quick ones there. If the parents are really keen to support both family members, then go down one path with one son and go down another path with another son. If borrowing power is the reason why you're combining all of that assets to grow family wealth, and I think that is going to be a big theme over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years as we start to see that wealth in households. We call them family offices. As people start thinking about their collective wealth as a family office, that's going to be quite interesting in terms of how that looks. But for the time being, sort of move on that pathway. The other thing, Sam, and for our community, two things I want you to read about from a behavioural economics point of view. One is called sunk cost bias, and the other one is called endowment effect. So if you read about those two things, they will also sort of start to give you an indication in terms of why you're thinking like you're thinking, which is, I don't want to realise a loss, right? So that loss aversion is the third one in that equation. You put those three things together, those heuristics are very, very powerful for you not to take action, when the reality could be, pulling off that Band-Aid and taking action may be the best solution. But back to Bryce's point, once you've modelled the numbers in terms of where the opportunity lives.
We would be totally reckless to say, I just sell, no problem. Because if it's part of a broader strategy and maybe it's delivering heaps of cash, it's just reckless for us to say sell without checking the numbers.
There was a clue of negative gearing in there as well. So that in itself is opportunity cost potentially.
100%. So because at
Great
some
question,
point...
Sam.
Yep. Oh, very good. Love it, Ben. Next question is from Scott. Scott is seeking advice on selling an investment property and a downsizing strategy, Ben. Let's have a little listen.
Oh, hi, boys. Long time listening to your podcast. Really good stuff. Got a question for you. My wife and I are in our mid-50s. We've got a principal place of residence worth about $2 million with a $170,000 mortgage, $87,000 offset. We've got an investment property which we purchased 20 years ago for $195,000. We're looking to sell it now. We should get about $700,000 for it. We've got about a mortgage of $95,000 off it, and it's positively geared at about $15,000 a year. We've got a combined super of about 1.5. So our plan is, we've kind of actioned it, but I guess if you could tell us whether we've made a good decision, but we're only halfway through the decision. So we're going to sell the investment house in Logan, south of Brisbane, and obviously we'll have to pay capital gains, etc. But then we're going to reinvest the funds to buy a unit or apartment or townhouse in Brisbane, with the view eventually to downsize the principal place of residence in Brisbane, which is valued at about 2. And then reinvest that into a unit on the Gold Coast. So ultimately in retirement, have a unit on the coast and a unit in Brisbane, potentially rent one out, but eventually, hopefully, don't have to rent either, and we can have a little bolt hole in Brisbane and a bolt hole in Gold Coast. Just interested in your thoughts about selling the investment and property and reinvesting it, or are we better off just hanging on to it? But we wouldn't ever live in the house in Logan. Thank you.
Ooh, Ben. Interesting.
This one's a ripper for many reasons here, and we've got to be careful because we can't give advice when it comes to self-managed super funds or superannuation advice, right? But there is something in here that is really important in regards to some of the new policy around being over 55, having held the property for 10 years. I'm hoping I'm getting this correct. Please double check my numbers here. So if you've held your principal place of residence for over 10 years, you can move up to 600,000, 300,000 each into super. Now, there is potentially, if I'm not mistaken, there's a limit on how much you can, the value of your super fund before you do that. So if the super fund is valued at greater than, I think it's like 1.68 or 1.7 million, then that might limit that ability to do that. Now, the idea here is, and I can only speak in facts, I can't speak to Scott's particular story, is when a fund is in pension phase, that ultimately means that it's tax-free. So potentially, hypothetically, you can move a significant amount of money in there and live off the investment returns off that tax-free. You still got to take drawings, but that's basically what it looks like. Now, Bryce, I'm doing an episode soon with Julia Hartman, in terms of tax preparation and tax planning coming in to the tax season. I would want Scott to listen to that episode and anyone who's interested in this, because this is all about landing the plane. And when we are talking about landing the plane and getting our priorities right, this is ultimately where financial planners will step in and take the baton from property investment advisors traditionally, and even from brokers and those type, and accountants. Now, Julia Hartman is our chief tax advisor, and she can also talk to the rules of the game, but we can't give direct advice when it comes to information. So we're giving general information, general advice in terms of what this story looks like. My big question in Scott's example is, okay, so a pad in Brisbane and a pad on the Goldie, that's interesting in terms of allocating that capital. My first question is, how long do you think and how often are you going to stay in those particular markets? Because it could be more beneficial to actually do an Airbnb or something along those lines if it's not going to be for extended periods of time, and have that money potentially invested. Because one of the great things of staying in short stay accommodation is you're not paying for electricity, you're not paying for the body corporate fees, the stratas, the improvements on the property, the sinking fund, all of those other things. So romantically, it sounds great in terms of being able to, zip down to the Goldie for the weekend in that apartment, and then, where are you going to live in Brisbane? So they're unknowns to us, but they need to be known to you in terms of those priorities, in terms of what you're doing. But the downsizing does make a lot of sense, being able to realise that and have that money invested if they feel that they need to do that and they need extra cash. They're in a pretty strong financial position. So the other big part of this story for me is, what's the inheritance? What are you planning to leave behind? Are there kids? What's the story in terms of how much money you want to pass on versus how quickly and how much you want to enjoy and spend during your retirement years? So it is an excellent question, but it has a lot of nuance attached to it. And there are these little things you can do in terms of concessional and non-concessional contributions to super, which will inform my views as I got closer into the numbers in terms of giving any specific advice.
Yeah, good. And they are in a strong position. Like if you've got a $2 million house with a 170 mortgage on it and 87 in offset, you're under 100 grand on a mortgage, under 100,000 mortgage on a $2 million property, which is great. The first thing that jumps out to me, Ben, is the property they bought for 195,000 20 years ago is now it's doubled and almost doubled again. So it's a pretty good growth rate on that in that 2 decades, and it's positively generating 15,000. So my first question, if we were sitting in front of Scott and his wife, would be, what's the passive income you want, right? Because it's almost to your point before about Airbnb. It's like sometimes when you get a boat, you forget that it's probably easier to rent someone else's boat for the 6 weekends of the year that you're going to use it rather than own it for the 52 weeks. And there's probably that conversation I'd want to have with them. Because what's not being factored in here is if you've got a great place on the Goldie and you've got a great place in Brisbane, the opportunity cost of one of those pools of capital not being invested in the market is not being factored in here, which would be part of the conversation that you just said around that Airbnb as well. What's the net difference there? But for me, it's definitely we don't know what their taste is and what their budget is for the places. And the other part about Gold Coast unit living is, let me make an assumption here. They've got a principal place of residence worth $2 million. I'm making an assumption it's a house, Ben. I could be totally wrong, right?
Yep.
But then you could have it fully paid off and then you're paying your rates and insurance, fine. But sometimes when you go down to the Gold Coast and you buy a unit, you've got it fully paid off, no mortgage, but you're paying high body corporates and you're paying high maintenance and all that sort of stuff. So that's just a personal preference. That might not be anything that's to them, but it's that ongoing payment of living in a mortgage-free apartment or unit in on the Gold Coast. So they're the things that I'd want to know. But my initial response would be, if you've got an investment property that you're going to have to pay a ton of capital gains tax on to give away that cash flow that you're already receiving, combine that with your super. Imagine throwing $15,000 per year plus all the perks from super, plus considering what you said before about topping up a bit more into your super as well and putting it into that tax environment. Yeah, I'm with you. There is definitely no way we can answer the question here without being general.
No. I mean, the other one that would also be interesting from a scenario point of view is, okay, let's rent out your principal home. So get it valued. Any of the value that you've got from day one, that's locked in. That's your principal place of residence, right?
Yeah.
But, through whatever reasons, purpose, needs, being closer to the city for work or whatever it is, if that's your primary, then what if you rented out your principal home for a period of time? And the rent that you got for that paid for renting somebody else's apartment in Brisbane or somebody else's apartment on the Gold Coast, right? So this is why it's a fascinating little scenario here in terms of, I would want to know the end game, and then I'd work back from the end game in terms of, in a lot of cases, most people just want to know that they're going to be comfortable in retirement. They're going to be okay. If people are trying to shoot the lights out and are trying to get the absolute maximum returns, then it's a different approach, but it also carries other risk elements associated with it well. So I think there's learning here for Scott and his partner about reading up around what the rules are around super and what you can contribute. And then the trade-off then, or the other model that I would do, is retaining that home, potentially renting it out, seeing what sort of rent we would get from that, and would that cover us in terms of renting out an apartment, because it's still your principal place of residence, right? So ultimately, the 6-year rule, any capital gains that you're making over that period, and then it's almost like a try before you do exercise. Right? If you're really loving it, and that's exactly what you thought it would be, and to your point, you're utilising it as much as you thought you would, then maybe why not? There's low maintenance. You close the door behind an apartment. You don't have to worry about mowing the lawns or worried about the fence, and there's all of those little aspects to it. So it is a great question, and I think if you sat in front of 10 different couples, you're probably going to potentially get at least 10 slightly different variations of an answer.
Yeah, nice. I think there's a couple of closing thoughts for me here for you, Scott. Number one is the conversations that Ben and I have had over our careers with people who have a romance versus reality. And again, I'm not saying this is the case with you, right? But sometimes the idea of having what you've described is better than the actual reality of it. Once, because it's almost been, forgive me, it's almost like when people, because I've done a television show where people want to move from one city to another. And I see it time and time again where it becomes this postcard move. Oh, I holidayed there. It'd be so amazing to live there.
Yeah.
It'd be so amazing. And then when they do it, they go, gulp. networks.
Look at all the people moving back from Noosa to Melbourne because they're
all
bored.
that stuff. So I feel qualified for the romance versus reality conversation. So, and again, I'm projecting unknowns, Scott, because I don't know the details for you. But the other thing I'd say too, Ben, is there's a lot of buyers agents out there who I feel that you and me and what we've been doing with our team, we've been pioneering planning in this country, right? The formalizing of planning. I've told my backstory that the reason that you and I are in business together is because when you showed me the plan for the first time, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the missing piece. This doesn't exist anywhere else. I want to be a part of that, including some of the software products that were on the path. Now, since we've done this journey of the podcast, everyone's done their own, and some people do planning, which is just to help with the next purchase. And we're like, that's not what we're about. We're not planning for the next purchase. The reason we want to do planning is for conversations that Scott's having. What about this? What about that? Optimize this. Do I put that in front or do I put that behind? Then by the way, I've got all that worked out. Let's decide if we're going to buy an investment property. That's the lane that we play, and that's the lane I think that is grossly misunderstood in the marketplace right now.
Yeah.
Where a lot of buyers are, we can do a plan, and they do it for a few $100 or maybe $1,000. The buying the next property, that's not where the game's at.
It's chalk and cheese.
Should I be buying the next property and when?
Well said.
So, Scott, hopefully that's helped you. We obviously didn't get to a specific outcome. We can't validate your plan or not based on what we've got, but hopefully we've given you some stuff there to think about. Hey, next question, Ben, is a combination of two questions.
Yes.
We're going to hear from both of those questions, and we're going to combine them because you're going to work out pretty quickly that they're in the same lane, and then you and I will talk about. First one is from Ethan, who's been on the podcast before, Ben. So to give you some context around this, he was a summer series, episode 471, and he built a $2.3 million property portfolio after leaving school at 16. So he's actually a really experienced property investor. So he's got a question. And then the second one is from Viv, in same lane. Not so sure about the backstory with Viv, but you'll see what I mean once we go through it. So let's have a little listen to both their questions now.
G'day, legends. Ethan from episode 471 here. I've just got a question regarding rooming/boarding houses. I've recently had an incident at one of my investment properties where the property is going to be fully demolished. Thankfully, no one was injured and for insurance. With this event not being part of the plan for me, it has led me to try and create a new opportunity out of this misfortune, which has led to me to do a deep dive into rooming houses. With all the research I've done in this area, it seems like it's a very attractive investment with an ROI of 9+%, extremely low vacancy rates with other properties very similar to what I would like to do in this area. The Victorian government not applying land tax to rooming houses, and the location will be under 1 kilometre from the centre of town. I'm fully aware of the extra costs/risks involved in this investment, like higher overhead costs, management fees, higher insurance, cleaning costs, higher build costs, to name a few. The pros just seem to outweigh the cons at this stage, but is it too good to be true? I'm still in full research mode, as there are several other options I'm currently exploring. I'd love to hear your boys' thoughts on this type of property investment, as I know you guys are like myself and like to buy fully established rather than build. Keep up the good work, guys.
Hi guys, I've invested in 4 rooming accommodation properties that have good income. They are about 10% return. And I'm just trying to figure out how to transfer to retirement. Do I sell them? Do I hold them? They're a little bit different than a normal rental property because they're semi-commercial, so it's not going to be as easy to sell at the drop of a hat as a normal rental property, so I don't want to be restricted by that. So I'm just wondering, have you had any experience with rooming accommodation? 2 properties are built to rent, so 5 bedroom, 5 bathroom with individual little apartments. And the other 2 are properties that I hold in my self-managed super that I created from existing properties in there. So I'd be interested to hear your feedback about these rooming accommodations and where they fit in the retirement strategy. Thanks very much. Love your show. Bye.
What do you reckon, Ben?
Yeah, look, I mean, these are really interesting questions. Now, full disclosure, we have not done any work in terms of rooming houses. I have not invested in rooming houses. I'm currently investing, and I'll tell my story halfway through this year around what we're doing in our Airbnb and our short-term accommodation for one of our properties in Flemington. I'll tell you the pros and cons and what we've learned about that. But in terms of this, there's a couple of things going on. For Ethan, the theme that's coming through here is he's looking for higher income. And what you will potentially find for investors who build larger portfolios, their attention does start to look towards income, as opposed to that, just getting the capital growth, because it's the income that they're going to be able to live on as part of that. Now, we don't know what's happened with the property. We can assume that it's being demolished because there's been some damage or some irreversible repairs that need to happen to that property. So it's better to just demolish and build. What I can tell you in terms of the people who I have spoken to around rooming housing solutions, there seems to be more consideration around the design of the rooming house and how it can potentially blend in and not be so much dedicated to just, borders and rooming house type solutions. Because Ethan is right, and so is Viv, in the sense of the resale on a property like that. It suits a certain market. And it's similar to whether it be student accommodation or, holiday letting type accommodation. These people are told about these higher returns, but with that higher return, and what I can give a sneak peek on Jane and my situation with our, our short stay accommodation, is it's definitely extra work for us. We definitely have to be a bit more aware and I'm taking the bins out or bringing them back in on to and from work. Like, it's not a set and forget type of investment. And I think that's what you're going to see here in terms of but what I do like about Ethan is he's got a bit of experience behind him. He knows what set and forget looks like, and he's young and he's energetic and he's aspirational. And so I would be sort of saying, sounds really good. What you build in the floor plan and the ability to potentially convert that floor plan later on should be a consideration. Because to his point, not everyone's going to walk into a property that's got 4 bedrooms and 4 kitchens and say, oh, this is going to be perfect for us. I'll never see my children. They'll be cooking their own eggs and bacon in the morning in their own room as they continue their 24/7 cycle of social media addiction. Whatever that sort of thing looks like, right, in terms of that. So I would be considering that as part of that assessment, because obviously those types of yields are very, very attractive for people who have got a little bit more sophistication and who want to take on a bit more risk. I'll just round out Viv's story. Should I sell them? Do I hold them? That is a great question around timing of that, getting some research done around the levels of demand that is in terms of, and doing obviously some research in terms of, are they growing in capital growth? Like, for a passive investor, capital gains is the number one, right? That is, if someone's thinking about why invest in property, most people who buy set and forget properties, it's all about the future capital growth, which obviously then ratchets up the income as part of that particular story. So I would certainly be getting some modeled advice around tax and capital gains and how you might play that out. But I would start simply by sort of saying, what are these things owe you? What are they worth? And how much time frame have we got here, Viv, in terms of landing the plane for your retirement?
Yeah, you covered it really well, Ben. Like, what I love about these two questions is there is a time and a place when you actually want to get income out of the property. A lot of the time we're helping investors get in, and that capital base needs to grow early, right? But at some point in time, we need to pivot to income. So, Viv's talking about hers being in self-managed super fund. She's got 4 of them, so she's experienced. Ethan, whilst being young, is still experienced in the property game. So I, first of all, I put the level of sophistication for these two would be above average. So that's a tick, right? And clearly, to your point, that they would be chasing additional income to round out the portfolio. So I think that's great too. I think I should do the same declaration that you did. I haven't got personal experience in this, but I like to think of it like what Joel in our team says. You don't have to have had a heart attack to be a cardiac surgeon. And so conceptually, what we like here is income, risk, your level of sophistication. How does that add to the portfolio? Because at the end of the day, how much you're worth on a balance sheet is not as important as how much cash flow you get access to. So these two people have that access to cash flow. There's one around the corner from where I live, Ben. It just looks like a standard house, and they actually have 4 people living in it, and they've really ramped up that income. So what I like about that is if they change that strategy, I've had a look at the plans online, but I haven't looked inside. But I think it's still largely can go back to a standard house at some point. So the margin of safety for that particular investor is pretty good, because whilst this strategy keeps running, great, they're obviously creaming cash flow. But at some point in time, if circumstances change, they put a big for sale sign out the front. It's not as if someone's going to go, oh, that's a dedicated student accommodation house. No, that's a standard street, 2 standard houses next door to it, and so margin safety is pretty good.
What's the refit going to be worth? The refit it's got to be 30 to 50 grand to structurally refit the house back to a normal home, right? So then you're thinking about, well, okay, I got all this extra cash flow, but for how long? Because I've just had to give it back in terms of retrofitting.
Solar, isn't it? It all makes sense to put solar up so you eliminate your electricity bills, but it takes you 4 years to get your money back, right? So it's kind of like the payback period. So, but I've also got a mate who lives down here in Torquay, Ben, and he's bought student accom houses in Geelong, and he's creamed it, absolutely smoked it. Has lifestyle by design dialed in, got into the game early, but I to your point around collecting he's collecting the bins, like he's doing all of that. So it's active versus passive.
In the business. Yeah, he's in the business. Like he hasn't got a passive private rental accommodation business. He's got an active private rental accommodation business.
I think he's got like I'll butcher this a little bit, but I think it's like 70 rooms.
Yeah.
70 rooms.
So that is a true active small private, that's a motel in a way, right?
Yeah. So therefore we're not sort of a passive. So therefore the strategy is great. If for what we know about Ethan and what we're projecting about Viv, it sounds great. It sounds like they've got really good cash flow and it's in the right vehicles. And for Ethan, he's in research mode, but maybe by now he might have acted on it. To Viv's question about selling, my initial impression is if it's doing really great and you can use that cash flow to help retire out debt and and you can adopt the hold forever philosophy, then you don't have to worry about any of that stuff around, it's semi-commercial and there's not a lot of buyers. And so again, she says she doesn't want to feel restricted by that, but doesn't have to feel restricted by that if she can hold it forever and keep the passive income. And it's in an area where the demand is likely to stay strong for that type of stuff. And, I also had a recent conversation with a friend a couple of weeks back, Ben, and he like you, is having a look at the Darwin market and is very enticed by the NDIS opportunity. And I just looked at him and I said, mate, it sounds great, that cash flow, but margin of safety doesn't work for me because of the purpose-built nature of it. And his risk appetite for that is different to my risk appetite for that. So overall, what are we saying? I think there's good on you, Ethan, for having the mindset that's turning a problem into an opportunity, first of all. But it all comes down to your own risk profile around active versus passive. You've already front-footed the fact that you know that there's higher overheads and higher maintenance and all those sorts of things. But you are moving from a private rental accommodation business to a more of a active motel style business. So if you have an appetite for that and the income works for you, and the numbers work out for you, why wouldn't you? And to Viv's point, and to your question, Viv, hopefully you don't have to sell them.
But you are in a more active space, to your point. And one of the things, like when we're talking about repairs and maintenance, people might say, well, wait a minute, it's still a 4-bedroom house. And so if you had a normal house where people were living in that home, you'd have the same level of wear and tear. Now, that's the quick thinking view. Here's the reality. Whenever you mix water with property, there's a lot more risk. And so if you've got 4 kitchenettes in a property, you have greater risk. You've got, cupboards, and water penetrates a lot of areas, right? So you'll have swelling of your bench tops, and now if they're stone or whatever. But eventually over time, there will be greater risk in terms of pipes bursting and all of these other things that create a lot more risk. Now, of course, you can insure against some of them, but the general wear and tear on a property like that does mean that potentially every 7 to 10 years, you might be looking at a kitchen refurb, or in this particular case, a kitchenette refurb. And so you then got to say to yourself, well, is that going to be 30%, 40% more than what I'm paying for one standard kitchen? Right? And then obviously same with your bathrooms, right? More bathrooms, more maintenance, more mold, more of those other sort of stories, right? So I've got a couple of properties that have got 3 bathrooms in them. And yeah, that extra bathroom has higher maintenance attached to it. So again, I do like the idea for people who have more interest, want to be a little bit more active, and have got miles in their legs when it comes to their interest in property. And I'm looking at Viv's email address, and with something like, I won't say the full address, but with I love property mixed in it, it's clear and passionate that she's really interested in the subject matter, right? And so for those people who want to be really hands-on, I absolutely think you need to do some research in this area. It is an opportunity, especially with the land tax in Victoria, etc. And as I said, I met a couple of people recently at picker events who are right into this stuff, and they're doing wonderfully well out of it. But the other thing you can also, it's a bit like granny flex, when everyone starts doing it, there potentially is a slight risk of oversupply. But the governments love it because it means that, rents are cheaper, affordability in terms of rental affordability, there's an aspect to that as well. So right now, and for the next 5 or so years, it's definitely an interesting area if you want to be a bit more active.
Yeah, so my final point on this, Ben, is most people aren't property investors, and most people who are property investors stop at 1. So if you happen to be someone who's in the 2 or the 3 category, and you're starting to get a run rate and an appetite, and your risk profile's moving, because remember, when we're building out a plan for a client, it's usually, let's chase growth early, let's chase income late, right?
Yep.
So these guys have just got a chasing income strategy. So, but it's active. And that's probably the point for our community. It's active. But
it's active.
Nothing wrong with it. Hey, great question. Ethan and Viv, let us know if that was helpful to you. And just a reminder, whenever we do these episodes, Ben, if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au, on the front page, there's a little widget button. It's so easy to leave a message. We love these questions from you, and we love hearing from them. So again, thanks Ethan, Viv, Scott, and Sam for your questions. All right, Ben, my life by design hack today is, well, it's a continuation of where my headspace is at the moment. I've declared that over the last few weeks around trying to learn the art of parenting teenagers, which...
Well, you could stay in this space for your entire life, you know that, don't you?
Well, it'll move into what happens when they go independent and all that sort of stuff. But no, look, I've openly declared that I'm trying to win the game of staying connected to the hearts of my boys whilst they are teenagers, because I've seen what happens. And but this one, try this little parenting hack, Ben. If you want your kids to do something, hand them a note. And I've tried this on a little Post-it note. So put it on a paper. So instead of yelling or nagging, put it just write the note and see what happens. And it actually works. I said to Sam the other day, I wrote him a little note, and I just said, "Can you put your school bag away?" And he reads the note, and it's almost like if I had said that, he would have said yes, yeah. But he got up and he did it. So then I tried it with Jack. I said, "Mate, he's got these cans that he leaves around the house. He likes, this flavoured coconut water, right?" And I'm forever telling him, "I'm going to fine you, going up your front." So I thought I saw this thing, and I thought I will try it. So I wrote it on a little note, and he read the note, and he just looked at me, and he just gets up, and he went and did it. So, mate, it's so far the experiment is working.
Okay, you're 100%. You're 2 from 2.
2 from 2. So so there we are, folks. Instead of nagging and yelling, get a little Post-it note, write out, "Can you do this?" And just, it's almost like, you're giving them a little project. So anyway, I'll keep you posted on if it actually has legs, Ben. But across my desk, I've tried it. 2 for 2, not too bad. Hey, what's making property news?
Mate, I'll just tell you what's making property news. As I'm sharing my screen, I'm multitasking here. That's pretty impressive for this.
Oh, that is impressive for two
this
reasons.
person
One,
knows
you're a
something.
male, and two, you're a Collingwood supporter. So that's impressive.
Look, I mean, I'm speaking to the obvious story here, Bryce, but last week the news broke about the latest bonds data out of Victoria.
Yeah.
I mentioned, it's just horrible.
Yeah.
Have a look at the chart there at the top. It falls off a cliff.
Yeah.
Absolutely falls off a cliff.
So let's describe the audio listeners, Ben.
Yeah. So we've lost 24,484 rental properties from December to December last year. So December 24, this is how bad it's getting that they're delaying the release of this data. Like, where are we now? We're in May, right? And they're releasing December data. They do not want you to know about it. And earlier this week, this state government of ours released an appalling state budget with further debt attached to it. I mean, seriously, they are going to rob the next generation of any success because businesses are getting jack of having to look after Labor's spending problems.
Mm-hmm.
But this is an example of where, and it might be well-intentioned in terms of looking after tenants, but it can't be well-intentioned if you're seeing that sort of level of decline in the number of properties. Now, obviously, I got contacted by the news outlets at the time, and they were sort of saying it hasn't really impacted rental growth. Well, I'm telling everyone who owns a property in Victoria, you have permission to increase your rents according to the costs associated with running your property here. You're about 10 to 15% under market compared to comparable properties in Sydney and also Queensland and Western Australia. So, and even Hobart for that matter. So please, when your rental review comes up, make sure you're putting the appropriate price on there for the increased cost that this Labor government has put on you in terms of land tax, in terms of higher compliance costs, and in terms of now minimum standards and no grounds evictions that are coming soon.
Max Chandler Math is coming for you on Twitter with statements like that.
Well, it's just dumb policy, and it's affecting the marketplace accordingly. So I just think, we'll still continue to keep seeing rents rise, but it's up to us to also make sure that we're holding our property managers who might be thinking, oh, no, you don't need an increase, you just had an interest rate cut. No, we're doing it tough as property investors in Victoria, and we need to make sure that we can run our business sustainably.
Yep.
At the end of the day, we're about taking a passive income off the risk and the investment that we're taking. So it's important that the message gets out there in terms of those rents have to keep moving to accommodate the costs associated with running these properties. If not, and this is the worst case, and this is what I'm saying, you'll get the superannuation funds and all that getting the concessions, or government's going to have to find another 10, 20, 30 billion dollars to replenish the stock that we need for rental accommodation in this state. It really is, I know it's becoming a broken record here, but it's becoming very frustrating, and the trend is continuing. There is less and less rental properties in this state, and ultimately vacancy rates are going. The only thing that saved them, Bryce, just as a final point here, is what's happened with international students. It's been reported that over 40,000 less international students are in the Melbourne market at the moment. That has a meaningful impact on certain stock, i.e. city high-density rents. So they haven't necessarily gone up. But if you look at the sort of areas around houses and townhouses and the like, in the regions and the broader areas, they are going up, and they'll continue to keep going up.
Well, Ben, you said the broken down record. Well, one thing people can't accuse us of is not trying to have a look over the hill and not trying to let them know what's happening. And I kind of think that the data that you're presenting and the conversation we're having here is just a reinforcement of, okay, well, those were the decisions that were made back then. You're treating property investors like they live in a vacuum, who aren't impacted by these things and aren't going to just roll over. So, yeah, I think it's important. And one thing's for sure, you and I are 100% on every one of these podcasts, but not everyone of our audience has listened to every one of them. So at least we're reinforcing the message as it happens in the moment. So thank you for that feedback. And thanks again to Sam, to Scott, and also to Ethan and Viv for their joint question around rooming. We appreciate their their questions. And I haven't said this for a little while, Ben, because it slipped my mind. But anyone who writes in,
yes,
that we read out their question, we give them a free course, Ben. It's $500 worth
Start
of
and
value.
build course.
If you want to reach out to the Stig at info@thepropertycouch.com.au, we will make sure that you get access to that just because you participated. Excuse me. And for anyone in the past who got a shout out, and I forgot to say it at the time, you're also welcome.
Reach out. You're entitled to a free start and build course.
So there you go, folks. And another quick shout out to folks, thepropertycouch.com.au. Go and leave yourself a question. Let us know what's going on. Now that interest rates have gone down, what are your questions? Now that we've got tariff issues going across the geopolitical landscape, what are your questions? Now that we've got stuff going on with across the states in terms of not having landlords in control of their assets, what are your questions? What are your questions, folks? What do you want us to answer? We want to make sure that we're talking to the questions that are important to you. But mate, good episode as always. We love Q&A. We've loved Q&A for 10 years, and I don't think we will ever get sick of Q&A.
No,
but,
love answering questions.
Until next week, mate.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
See you next week, folks.